So, there's a film that I watched last year. It was one I had intended to watch a long time ago, but ended up not seeing it for reasons I can't even remember. Eventually, I decided, screw it, and finally gave it a look. And what I found was a film that doesn't have a particularly thrilling or even interesting plot or characters you can dissect and dive into, but has nonetheless stuck with me ever since. That film is Lovers Rock.
Lovers Rock is the second film in Steve McQueen's 2020 Small Axe anthology, a series of 5 films that focus on members of the Caribbean diaspora, their families, and their experiences in 20th century Britain. Wikipedia describes the plot as 2 lovers meet at a reggae house party in 1980 in West London.
I don't know if they were just lazy and couldn't be asked to do a full summary, but honestly, there isn't much more to add.
2 young people meet each other at a house party. There's a bit of tension with a guest who's way too handsy, to put it mildly. But everyone has fun, and the main characters end the night a couple.
To be honest, the plot is actually my least favourite among the 5 films. It isn't the most narratively exciting, the pacing is a bit meh, and some of the characters can feel a little two-dimensional or inconsistent. The film overall, however, is my second favourite in the anthology, maybe a contender for number 1, and that's because the film isn't just about 2 lovers meeting at a party. It's about the healing power of music, dance, community, spaces, and black joy and beauty, and the film communicates all of that not through its plot, but almost a complete absence of it.
Long portions of the film are dedicated to the characters simply dancing, whether it's slow, tender, intimate and romantic, focusing on the small details of how 2 new lovers hold and caress each other. Whether it's wild, bombastic, energetic, frenetic, the camera pulling out to capture the hype of the whole room, Lovers Rock is really a film that revels in moment. The Small Axe anthology is one that naturally focuses on the pain and trauma suffered by London's West Indian community. The struggle of black-owned businesses to simply exist, the crackdown leading to and resulting from the 1981 Brixton riots, the open corruption and racism of the Metropolitan Police, the educationally subnormal children excluded from mainstream schooling, the institutional denial that any of the above even existed. It's a series that brings out so much sadness, loss, grief, indignation, rage.
But then you have Lovers Rock, which sticks out compared to the other films, and I think for a very good reason.
Lovers Rock has its darker points. A close call with some ominous racist outsiders, the recent loss of one's parents, a vicious assault leading to a tense confrontation. But these instances, the most eventful events the film has, feel less like the foundation of the film and more like violent intrusions. Attempts to break in and shatter the sanctity of this safe space. There is a more dramatic, eventful story constantly trying to assert itself, but time and time again it is told no. Go away. Leave us alone. Let us have this moment. As a people so many try to define by our suffering, one of the most impactful ways of rebellion is through joy. A celebration of the life others would deny us through expressions enjoyed not just by those same others, but also unique to us. The film is named in tribute to the music that gave people the safe spaces to express that love of life, body, and spirit. And it shows that love and joy not through dialogue, action, events, plot, but through slow, physical, lingering, beautiful moments. Quoting Angelica Jade Bastine, the film isn't so much what happens, but how it happens. In other words, fuck plot. This shit is beautiful. If Lover's Rock was defined by an absence of plot, 2021's Tenet is defined by an absence of everything else. The one sole overriding objective of this film is to get from one set piece to the next as fast and efficiently as possible within its runtime. Everything that doesn't aid in that objective is given as little attention as the film can get away with. How does all this weird inverted physics work? No one cares, don't think about it. Hey, how about we take a minute to reflect on what we just— shut up nerd, we gotta move. Characters? What characters? Other than the evil Russian billionaire whose name I had to look up, his depressed and abused wife, and Robert Pattinson, there are no characters in Tenet, just walking archetypal exposition machines. Nobody even has the time to ask the protagonist his name. To invert that Bastien quote, that's cute. I didn't do that on purpose. To invert that Bastien quote, the film is almost all about what happens. Fuck how and why.
And let me be clear, this isn't me saying the film isn't any deeper than its plot. I actually think there is a fair bit of thematic depth to Tenet. Its concept pokes at ideas of free will, determinism, the relationship between future and past generations. As a child of a physics teacher, I find its look into the nature of entropy and time as a physical dimension thought-provoking, if nothing else. And I do think there is something fascinating about how aggressively and purposefully it min-maxes its attributes and what that says about filmmaking and storytelling. But other than a literal handful of scenes, the film doesn't really take any time to soak in itself as Lover's Rock does, which in turn means the film can't really reflect and engage with its ideas, because by the time you start processing them, we're suddenly in another exposition or action scene.
Sato reveals the future wants to wipe out the present out of revenge for their ancestors destroying the Earth through climate change, and all he gets in response is, damn. If only they were the protagonist.
And while I do like it when a piece of media encourages you to think about its ideas and concepts beyond what it explores itself, Tenet doesn't so much sow the seeds of discussion as it does throw the bag in your face and tell you to plant it yourself. Don't get me wrong, the plot fucks, but shit isn't beautiful.
To be fair to Tenet, it's not like every film has the luxury or even the opportunity to be a Lover's Rock. I mean, as interesting as a sensual slow dance between John David Washington and Robert Pattinson would be, I don't think that's the kind of vibe Tenet was going for. So it might be a little proper to compare the film with something a little more in its lane. Neon Genesis Evangelion is a lot.
I've seen the original anime, The End of Evangelion, and all 4 of the rebuild films twice, and I'm only confident I could tell you like 70–80% of the plot.
I'm still not totally sure what Adam and Lilith are and what they have to do with moons, or how Ava Unit 1 is also Shinji's mum, or how human instrumentality works. Like I know what it does, but how is the question. And the spears, I don't even know what the deal is with the spears and whatever the hell the Chamber of Guff is. And don't even get me started on the rebuilds, which are a retelling, but also a sequel in a cool meta sense, but also kind of a literal one as well. Long story short, Ava's plot is infamously convoluted, to put it mildly, especially towards the end when they suddenly begin throwing out lore and terms without any rhyme or reason.
I don't think it's completely nonsensical, but you will have more than your fair share of what the fuck is going on moments while watching it. Some parts of it you might not ever understand. So, not too dissimilar to Tenet then? If that's the case, then why is Tenet a conceptually interesting but ultimately just pretty entertaining film, and Evangelion one of the best TV and film franchises ever written? Ultimately, I think it comes down to characters. I think a good analogy for Tenet's characters is that they are action figures being moved around by a child, making up a story in his head, completely independent of whatever backstory those figures were given on the back of their box.
With the exception of Kat and maybe Neil and Seta, none of the characters has any personal stake in the conflict beyond saving the world. Which, to be fair, is a perfectly valid motivation in this situation.
But because no one's motives are really coming from themselves as individuals, it creates the feeling that the story isn't as much about them as it is happening to them. Which is ironic given the ending twist that there's an older version of the protagonist out there manipulating everyone behind the scenes, so the story is literally about him, but that's the feeling I get.
I guess you could say him wanting to save Kat is the protagonist's personal motive, but I mean, come on. The main character wanting to save his love interest isn't exactly revolutionary storytelling here, folks.
This is not an issue I have with Evangelion. At all.
Even in the more episodic, plot-driven first half of the anime, it never feels like the characters are just reacting to things happening outside of their control. The plot tries to force Shinji to get in the robot, but ultimately he's the one who makes the decision to do so, makes the decision to leave, come back, and so on. He does it not just to save the world, but to find a sense of belonging, to do something he can be good at and proud of, to connect with other people in his life, to have a father who gives him the time of day, let alone says he loves him. Same with Asuka, Gendo, Misato, etc, etc. The show goes out of its way to show the characters doing what they do for reasons that really mean something to themselves as individuals. Even when the characters are in situations that deprive them of agency or technically have no real personal motives, they still have depth through the exploration of that fact, of that lack of agency or motive. As a result, the story feels like more than just a series of events that are just happening and need to be dealt with. It's the result of many different people making many different choices colliding into each other.
The plot, the actual events happening aren't so much the main attraction as they are a road. They're there to give the protagonist something to drive on. How they do so and where they end up going, that's the draw of the show.
And the finales, where the story essentially gets thrown out the window, the car driving off a cliff, and the show just becomes the characters talking to each other, no filter, just unpacking their hang-ups and trauma and relationships. This is where you go, fuck the plot. This shit is beautiful. TLDR, the character writing in Evangelion is so strong it acts as a kind of baseline, to the point where you don't really need to know what happens to get the series. As long as you can follow the characters and their arcs, you will understand Evangelion. But because Tenet, by comparison, is so stripped back in terms of its characters, if you don't get anything out of the plot, then what reason do you have to care?
It goes beyond just these examples. Properties with interesting premises and plot can fall flat for me if I don't give a shit about the characters.
And stuff that doesn't have that initial hook of a premise can still be really enjoyable as long as they nail those characters. After years of pretentiously ignoring them, I've been delving into a fair few rom-com anime and manga this past couple, and the best of them can almost be summed up as tossing a bunch of interesting, compelling, or just fucking weird characters in a box and just watching them bounce off each other and evolve in cool ways.
In fact, if you're good enough, you don't even really need character. You'd be surprised just how far you can go just off of vibes.
One of my favourite manga ever is Blam by Tetsumu Nihei, a series which is carried almost entirely by its world and atmosphere. The plot is literally just a man with the personality of this fridge magnet wandering around an infinite decaying cityscape shooting things. And that's fine, because the focus of the series is the artwork and environment. Silent and often alone, Killy, said fridge magnet, rarely says or even thinks anything, and it's not uncommon for pages and pages and pages to go by completely wordless. just our protagonist stalking the veins of this magnificent corpse of a city. To reuse an earlier expression, the series and Nihei's work in general doesn't shy away from just soaking in itself, in its atmosphere, vibe, letting you get lost in its world, its moments. And through those moments, we find ourselves pondering the point of all this useless, meaningless expansion. Urbanization with no point, the inevitability of collapse, of ruin, even for the most advanced and powerful civilizations. Fuck the plot, because this shit is beautiful.
I keep going back to that Bastien quote. It's not what happens, but how it happens. There's a lot of there for people online who want to talk about what happens. Lore breakdowns, ending explained videos and articles, recaps, theories, predictions, plot hole spotters. You enjoy watching or making this kind of stuff? No shade. I even get it a bit. When I was playing Signalis for the first time, I literally started making notes about the world and background of the game, writing down theories and character bios. It was really fun. But around the midpoint of the game, as the plot became harder to parse, but the characters' motivations became clearer, I stopped writing down notes. Because through all the temporal madness, existential dread, and survival horror tension, what ultimately drew me in was the tragic, beautiful romance at the heart of it all. That's what I mean when I say fuck plot. I'm not saying it isn't an important part of storytelling. Lots of great pieces of media, some of which I would rank among my all-time favourites, are significantly plot-driven in many ways. The plot may just be a road, but God, it's a fine looking road sometimes, and maybe if you dig under the concrete you'll find some fantastic earth. But it's the characters who walk that road, the scenery you see when you stop and look either side. That's what makes something beautiful to me. I think Tenet is a good film. There's absolutely a place for it, and other films like it. It's just that place isn't here.
Before this video ends, I want to do a few things. Firstly, I want to thank my patrons for their support, in particular Michael Coolwood, my tier 3 patron. If you'd like to be credited at the end of each video, as well as get things like behind the scenes updates and early access to music, then be sure to pledge to my Patreon. The support means a lot, so thank you once again to all of them. Second thing is to shout out my new EP, Weltschmerz, which includes any original music used in this video. At the time of publishing, it should be out everywhere on streaming, as well as available for download on Bandcamp. Links in the description. I am still working on my album, but since I don't do this full time, I am unfortunately limited in how much focus I can give it. It is almost finished though, so look forward to that. Again, any and all updates will be on Patreon. Finally, I want to give a shout out to Max Tohline. They're a film scholar and fellow video essayist who offered some very valuable feedback during the writing phase, which really let the script take shape. So if you enjoyed this video, then you can find their stuff in the description below. Be sure to give it a watch and tell them thank you for me. That's all for now. See you later. Bye bye.